Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Sudio. If you're looking for a good Christmas present, look no further, because they have a very nice deal. You get a free gift box with every purchase, free fast delivery, and using my special 15% discount to top it all off, you get one hell of a bargain. So be sure to use the code MortisMedia15 at checkout when getting your earphones. You'll find all the information in the description. Be sure to hurry though, as stocks won't last forever. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Make sure those headlights are on, and let the darkness take control. There are two main routes that one can use to get from Napa to San Francisco. The first curves around through Emeryville, crosses over the Bay Bridge, and eventually arrives in the financial district. Every mile of the journey is well lit, populated and dotted by familiar signs of civilization. The same details are partially true of the second path, save for a long stretch of road that first crosses some hills, then eventually guides travelers through a dark, silent, and eerily isolated valley. It was there that I encountered something I cannot explain. I had recently become acquainted with a young woman who was unlike anyone I had ever met. She was beautiful and brilliant, and we seemed to share an almost supernatural connection. Looking back, I realized that hormones and mid-infatuation were playing tricks on my mind. But at the time, she and I were both not so secretly entertaining the idea of us being soulmates. The magnetism between us was so profound that it prompted me to share everything about myself with her. We took a weekend trip to Napa, which was my hometown, and spent some time with my friends, ate dinner with my parents, and just delighted in the sense of closeness that we both felt. Then, not long before we headed back to the city, the young woman and I decided to stop by a yard sale that we'd seen. Somehow or other, we get drawn into a conversation with the people selling their possessions, a middle-aged man and woman who claimed to see a spiritual link between me and my companion. They congratulated us on having found one another, but also offered us a word of caution, hinting that something dark, an otherworldly force, would be attracted to our happiness. "It will see you," the woman told us, "and it will try to feed on your love." It was creepy to say the least, but other than where romantic fantasies were concerned, neither my travelling partner nor I put any stock into the metaphysical. We thanked the couple for their time, exchanged a few passing well wishes, then got into the car and headed back to San Francisco. About half an hour later, we found ourselves on that stretch of empty road. The sun had set beneath an overcast sky, and the only visible lights in the area were those at the front of my car. Perhaps I was just mildly shaken by the warning we'd received, but as we travelled that open expanse of nothingness, I started to feel like I was being watched. The young woman agreed with me, describing a sense of being stalked by some unseen predator. I gripped the steering wheel, keeping my eyes on the road, and shouted with terror and alarm at an enormous beast that seemed to jump out of nowhere. The impact was jarring, and I had to swerve to keep control. "Are you okay?" I asked my companion. "The eyes," she whispered. "Did you see them?" "No," I confessed. "I didn't." "What did you see?" "They were red. They looked at me." When we came to the first streetlight, I pulled off the side of the road. My limbs were still shaking as I climbed out to assess any damage, and, with some confusion, I found that there wasn't a single dent or scratch visible, let alone any sign of collision. "That's impossible," the young woman protested. Having heard my report, the thing was enormous. "Come look at this," I replied. I waited as she joined me near the front of my car, then leaned down and gently ran my finger across the hood. A thin, slightly cleaner line was left behind. "I don't understand," the girl said. "If something hit us, how could there still be dust?" "Maybe something didn't hit us," I replied. "At least, maybe not something in the physical world." We drove the rest of the way back to San Francisco in silence. I was driving just east of Cambridge, Ontario, towards Toronto, on Highway 401, where the highway lightning had stopped. I saw some weird shapes in front of me crossing lanes. Turned out to be a dude in all dark clothing with a backpack. Now I kind of get people hopping the highways when close to civilization, but this was out in the middle of fields and wooded areas. I wonder what the hell happened to the guy, and where he was coming from. It was certainly very chilling to experience. Another one was during one of the first 3 times I drove down to Buffalo, New York, from Toronto. I suffered snap snowstorms, and one of them was particularly bad, and affected Toronto too. I was dropping my, at the time, girlfriend back home, and folks were struggling to get around and up the minor hills on Toronto's Don Valley Parkway. Some were just spinning their wheels and going backwards. Some of it was lack of knowing how to drive in the snow, but it was pretty thick and came down quickly. That was pretty scary there for a bit. I was followed home one night. I saw a car. I thought it was following me on the motorway. It pulled off when I did, and I didn't know why it freaked me out, but it did. I decided to drive the most bizarre way home I could think of, so I was always in well-lit and populated areas, and it kept following me. I pulled up outside my house, and it pulled up on the opposite side of the road, and just stayed. I locked the doors and phoned a male housemate to come to the car to meet me. As soon as he approached the car, the other one sped off. Another time was when I was driving home after going to a nightclub. Sober. Don't drink and drive, kids. And I was driving down the motorway when suddenly there were main beam headlights coming towards me. Somehow some dizzy tart had managed to go down the slip road the wrong way, and had decided that driving in the fast lane the wrong way on the motorway was more sensible than either stopping on the hard shoulder and calling for assistance, or driving down the hard shoulder to the next junction. Because it was late, I was tired, and it really freaked me out, and made me question whether I was on the correct side of the road. I was 16 and driving home at around 2 a.m. I was on a 45-mile-an-hour road, driving down what used to be kind of rural road, but had literally over 100 houses built off it for the last 10 years. It was pitch black, not even any moon or stars, so all I could see were what the lights showed me. There were no street lights or anything. Then out of nowhere, perhaps 50 yards away from me, these cop lights come on. The cop was on the road, vertically blocking both lanes, and I had to nearly slam on my brakes in order not to hit him. When I'm stopping, this ambulance that was stopped in the opposite lane turns his lights on too. They didn't even have their headlights on. It went from pitch black silence to flashing lights all around me, while having to avoid hitting a cop. The road was narrow, so the cop reversed, forwards, and reversed again a couple of times, pulling into the other lane. I pulled over for about 10 seconds, just in case, because I'd never been pulled over before and had no idea what was going on. They continued to face the opposite way in the other lane, with their lights still on, so I slowly begin to drive away. They don't follow me or do anything, so I turned and just went home. I still to this day have no idea what they were doing. If that cop hadn't have turned his light on when he did, I would have slammed straight into his door at 45, and it would have been 100% his fault. This story really freaked me out, and I have no explanation for it. I was driving up to New England from DC one night for my fiance's brother's college graduation. It was late at night, and we were in upstate New York somewhere on the highway. There weren't many cars on the highway, but there was one car, a late 90s Ford Explorer, ahead of us for a while, probably for about 50 miles or so, roughly a quarter to half a mile ahead of us. Then the highway turned left around this turn that was obscured by trees. I saw the truck round the turn and keep going left, so I thought it would be a sharp turn, so I slowed down a bit. I came around the turn and it straightened out immediately, and the truck was gone. Completely gone. There were concrete barriers on both sides of the highway, and there was no sign of an accident. No exits, no pull-offs. The truck just disappeared. There was an awkward silence between my fiancée and I, and after about 10 seconds, I say to her, did you see the truck? Where the hell did it go? She was looking pretty spooked and just stared forward and said she had no idea. I had the heebie-jeebies for the rest of the drive, and it freaked me out real good. It seems like such simple things, but when you're following someone for the better part of an hour, and then it's just gone, with absolutely no explanation, it'll shake you up. This didn't happen to me, but some of my friends, and it was the creepiest thing I've ever heard. Since we often went out together, they think I was there that night, and when it is brought up, they mention that I was one of the people in the car, but for some reason, I wasn't. There is/was a building in Campbelltown, which was a restaurant called Sopranos. Prior to that, it was a lot of things. Firstly, a steam house for a mill, then a maternity hospital. It passed through many hands and was used for many purposes, but during my lifetime, I remember it as a Fisher Ghost restaurant, due to its close proximity to the place where, according to local legend, the ghost of a murdered man pointed out where his own body was buried many years ago. Anyway, the restaurant closed and later reopened as an Italian restaurant named Sopranos. The TV series of the same name was very popular back then. On this night, 4 to 5 of my friends were in the car looking for a place to eat. They drove past Sopranos and agreed that it looked good. The lights were on, the place was relatively full, and they could even hear music. They parked the car at the liquor store next door and walked up to the restaurant. Only it was closed, and it had been for a long time. There had been a fire months before which had gutted the building, and yet a whole car full of people had seen the place clearly open for business. The building is still there, it's still in ruin, and the owner is using the building as leverage to push a large-scale development. One Saturday night in San Diego, at about 1 a.m., I was driving south of the 5 in the fast lane. It was a typical San Diego night. No clouds, no cold, not a hint of rain. The freeway was pretty dead. It was me and one dude, 2 lanes to the right, and we were cruising along. No big deal. In downtown near the airport and Old Town, the freeway directions are split, and on different levels, the northbound lanes are about 50 meters from the southbound lanes, and there's a massive retaining wall. So I'm driving along going south, And as I'm getting into exactly that area with this massive retaining wall, remember, I'm in the far left lane, a small sports car with a guy, and what I assume is his date, blow past me on the left. But I'm on the left lane. The guy was driving on the shoulder. He had no idea. The freeway was empty except for me, the dude to the right, and this crazy guy. He stayed in that lane for half a mile. Obviously, as soon as I realized he was driving on the shoulder, I moved out of the lane all the way to the right, and I had no idea what the hell he was thinking. He wasn't swaying, so he probably wasn't drunk. He was also going about 85, and he's lucky he didn't hit any debris and crash. Another time, I was driving in Seattle on a road that follows the course of a river. It's a major thoroughfare to the 405, so has 2 lanes in both directions, with the limit being 40. My husband was driving this time, and we were in the right-hand lane driving west, and suddenly, a pickup passes us going the opposite direction. He was driving on the wrong side of the street. There is no barrier between the directions, and he must have moved over a yellow line at some point and not noticed, which is a horrifying recipe for disaster on a road with a 40-mile-an-hour limit. As far as we know, he got very lucky, and there were no accidents. I was driving home one night with 2 friends at 2 a.m, and there was a Toyota Sienna really close behind us, roughly 5 inches away, in 2 separate intersection lights. And so I told my friend to go onto the freeway. We look back, and we see the Sienna swerve onto the freeway, almost hitting the guardrail, and we speed up and change lanes. The guy follows us and smashes into the back of our car. Then we were in a high-speed car chase, revving it up to 115 at peak, swerving through traffic. He rammed us 3 more times after, but thankfully there was starting to be traffic, so we swerved and he got about 7 or 8 cars behind us. We took an exit and made as many left turns and right turns as we could to avoid him. We eventually lost him, and I called the cops again after calming down. The first original cop during the car chase, and the police respondent claimed to tell me to calm down or he'll hang up, and had 2 very kind officers come as we explained the situation. We stayed in front of a motel until 5 a.m, and we were too afraid he'd find us again. And after we got home, we found a news story about the same description of the car in the same area, 4 to 5 minutes away after we lost him, killing a father on a bike in a hit and run. We called the police and told him what we knew, but never had any follow-up. I don't think that they ever managed to catch the guy. I was driving, and I had my brother in the back seat with my friend. My friend's girlfriend was in the passenger seat of my truck. We'd went to pick up some DJ equipment that my friend had ordered from a chain store, but pickup was in store a couple of hours away. We ended up driving through southern Vermont on the way home, and everyone was asleep but me. My brother was slipping back and forth between sleep and awake, and this happened when my brother was asleep. There was a car tailing us a bit back, and it was not a police vehicle. I ended up taking a loop, and it was still behind us. I ended up slowing down, and I ended up going over twice the speed limit, and the vehicle managed to persist. I was about to wake my brother up and have him call the police, but suddenly I noticed something. A big field next to us, and another road on the other side. I love mudding, and I knew my truck could handle almost anything I threw at it. Yes, I took my mudding truck to get the equipment, and was the only vehicle we had that can carry all the equipment, and I pulled off the road and through the field, and left huge tracks. When I pulled onto the other road, I look back, and see the car stuck in the mud. My brother ended up waking up as I got away from the car, and sleepily asked what happened. I told him to go back to bed. I was driving a friend back to their college apartment late at night. It was about a 2-hour drive between cities in northern Minnesota, so pitch black on the freeway. I came up behind a car going about the speed limit in the right lane, and as I had cruise set about 5 miles over the limit, I went to pass him on the left. I moved over to the left, sped up a little, and started overtaking them, when I saw something barely illuminated by my headlights up ahead in the left lane. It was so dark though, I couldn't make it out. Fortunately, I was able to hit the brakes, let the car in the right lane get ahead of me, and just barely get back into the right lane before passing whatever was in the middle left lane. As we passed it, it turned out to be a four-wheeler just sitting in the middle of the road. Best we could tell, it looked like it fell off a trailer or something. There were no lights or what looked like any people anywhere around it. We were quite shaken by how close we came to hitting it, and this was before cell phones, but fortunately there was a gas station a mile or so down the road, so we were able to stop and ask to use the phone to let Highway Patrol know about it. Hopefully no one else hit it. I didn't see or hear anything on the news about any accidents in the area around that time. I was 18 and living in southern Alabama. My friend was driving another friend in the passenger seat, and I was sitting in the middle of a bench seat in an old Ford Astro van. We were on our way home from another friend's house, driving through the backwoods on some run-down 2-lane highway that could have been on either side of the H in nowhere. We are listening to some tunes, laughing and joking, passing one round, when all three of us see it at the same time, and about shit ourselves. The driver was watching the road, and the person in the passenger seat and I look up simultaneously, and this dog just seemed to appear out of nowhere. I'll never forget it. It was nose down, sniffing the ground, walking casually across the street. Looked to be a golden retriever or yellow Labrador maybe. It happened in a flash, but the image of that dog is burned into my brain, because we were doing about 80. We heard the thump and felt the bump. Now, passenger seat is a girl, and she starts freaking out. She wants to check on the dog to make sure it isn't suffering, as there would obviously be no saving it. So we stop, back up to where we're absolutely sure it happened, because it's the only street light we saw for miles on this road, though the light didn't work, and we can't find anything. Nothing. Like the dog was never there. We check the bumper and the undercarriage. You would expect some kind of damage from ploughing through at least a 100-pound dog at 80. But there's no blood on the road or on the bumper, and we checked the undercarriage. Nothing. We drove at least a mile back and forth up and down that road looking for a dog on either side, or in the middle, or on the road, or blood splatters on the asphalt. Something to ease our minds as to what was going on. There was absolutely nothing. We had backtracked quite a way looking for the dog, but we decided to just move on and forget the whole ordeal. 2 minutes later, as we all sit not talking, listening to the radio, contemplating what just happened, there it was again. All three of us saw it. The same dog at the same place in the road like nothing had happened. Driver swerves around it this time and floors it, and books it out of there as fast as that shitty little van can carry us. We all share awkward glances with one another, knowing what just happened, but none of us want to talk about it. We joked about it once, but the girl that was there was really freaked out by it and would never speak of it. If we tried to talk about it, she would change the subject immediately. My wife and I were in her Toyota Yaris, going on holiday. We were super bored on the highway since we'd been driving in a straight line for hours. We had the bright idea to liven up the trip going through Teree. Unfortunately, it was Sunday, so Teree, being a big country town, was essentially closed. So I had the bright idea that since it was such a nice place, we just point the car in approximately the right direction and let GPS figure it out. We were heading through a town of a handful of houses and general stores, called Mount Johnson or something, and kept following the GPS, and it took us into a national park. The road got skinnier and skinnier, until the asphalt turned into nice, smooth, sandy dirt. At this point, we noticed how low we were on petrol, but it was a nice road and we were heading in the right direction. Then it started raining, and the GPS told us to turn right onto a road straight out of Colin McRae's Rally. It went uphill through big potholes full of water and led us to a clearing which the GPS assured us had 2 roads heading out of it. I couldn't even see one. I got out of the car and looked at what was maybe a track some 20 years ago, but it was now so overgrown I wasn't convinced I was looking in the right direction. We decided that since we have no fuel and had no idea where we were or where the next service station would be, the best idea would be to turn around. We'd not seen another person or car since leaving Turee, and that was at least 20 kilometers ago. There was no mobile telephone reception either, and night was starting to fall, and since we were surrounded by tall trees, it got dark really quickly. The clearing was small, but so is a Yaris, so I tried turning it around. Unfortunately, the bush grass was slick with rain, and every time the wheels started turning, the car would slip towards the edge of the clearing, which had a sharp drop and lots of trees. When the wheels weren't turning, the car was still sliding downhill very slowly. Staying in the car was not an option. To summarize, almost no fuel, no idea where to get fuel, and no idea where we were, night, rain, nobody anywhere near us, nobody who knew where we were, no phone reception and no recovery gear or tools, and a car that is slowly sliding downhill towards a drop that would not have killed us but would have certainly wrecked the car. I got the wife to drive while I pushed against the car to stop it slipping. It took a hell of a lot of pushing, but eventually the car slid down the track and banged its way through all the potholes. I shouted at my wife to stop until she got onto the smooth bit, but I was wasting my time as she left me in a spray of mud and I slid down the hill on my own. We rolled into Mount Whatever general store on fumes and noticed they had Bowser's at the front. So we were grateful, and we spent more money in that store than all of the other customers that day combined. Petrols, lollies, magazines, groceries, milk, eggs, everything. Then we got back onto the highway and vowed never to do that again. It's hard to describe how creepy this scene was in reality, since I find that just describing it does not do it justice, but I'll try anyway. A few years ago, the girlfriend and I were back from a road trip. It was a few minutes before midnight, driving on the Trans-Canada, when we decided to stop in this tiny town for some snacks. We headed into a gas station, buy our stuff, and enjoyed a few minutes eating in the parking lot, just as the gas station turns its lights off. We get back into the car and follow the service road trying to get back onto the highway. The service road then turns at about a 45-degree angle from the highway and goes a bit into the town. That's when we notice we're now driving towards a very bright light. It's a huge truck with all its lights on. The high beams are now on, and the floodlights above the roof are on as well. As we get closer, I noticed that it's in my lane right in front of the stop sign. To get to the intersection, I have to go into the opposite lane, just to drive around it. I proceed to do so, and out of some morbid curiosity I do so slowly, so I can look at the truck. All I can make out is that it's a black truck, and the tint of the side windows are so dark I couldn't see anything. I make my right turn around the truck and follow that road back to the highway. A few minutes later my girlfriend finally spoke, quite angry with me for driving around that truck so slowly. as if that window had opened, she would have probably screamed. For about half an hour later, a lingering feeling of creepiness remained, but we didn't see any more of the truck. I was taking summer classes in my third year of college, and the neighborhood I was living in was very suburban. No one would be out at night. I was driving home one day after class, and it was about 11. I was listening to the radio, and Britney Spears had made her comeback, so I was bopping and singing along with her. As I turned a corner, this dude suddenly walked out in front of my car. I know exactly what he looked like. Middle-aged white guy, hair already grey and an orange cap with a beige jacket and dark blue jeans. He turns and looks straight at me, and at that moment, my car goes through him. I didn't hear or feel a bump, but my first reaction was that I hit something, and so I immediately stopped the car and got out onto this empty street. But there's nothing. I even look under the car, and all around, but there's nothing there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hit or killed someone for a long time. The second was actually during the day, around noon. But it was very weird. I was driving down my street and I see two little girls riding their pink tricycles on the driveway of my neighbor's house across the street. I knew my neighbors and they had a son in high school, and their daughter went to the same college I did, so I thought it might have been their nieces or something. As I pull up, I roll my windows down and wave to them and say hi, because I started getting into being the friendly suburban instead of the antisocial city person. The two girls around 5 or 6 get off their trikes and stand together and just look at me, without any expressions at all. I wave again and shout hi a little louder, but they don't respond other than just stare at me. I feel embarrassed, because then I think, well, maybe their parents told them not to talk to strangers, and I would qualify as that. I kept my eyes on them since you never know if kids accidentally bum rush into the street and get killed. And as I turn into my driveway, I take my eyes off them for a split second. But when I turn back and look in my rearview mirror, they're gone. Just straight up vanished. I immediately stopped the car and got out and looked for them. I even shouted up and down the street, but there was no sign. I have no idea if they were real or just my brain misfiring, and how they got out of my sight so quickly. Not just them, but their tricycles were gone as well. I ran into my neighbor a few days later and asked them if they had two little girls over recently. They were confused and said no. It was January of this year, and I was driving with my friends around 3 in the morning. We were driving along my city main road, which leads about 10 miles into the desert. Once we got to the end, you can either make a left or right turn. We looked to the left and saw this light on in the distance, and wondered what it was. So we're driving back to the city, and one of my friends tells me about this place that's an offshoot off the main road that was something that I didn't remember. We get onto that road and go to the place my friend was talking about. So I turn around and go back on the main road, and as we were approaching, we see a school bus just drive by. I could tell it was a school bus because it had that top light on the bus that school buses have, and my friends were able to see the reflective tape that school buses should have. I try to hurry onto the main road to see the school bus, but I have to drive slowly because the road I'm on is full of holes. When we get to the main road, the bus isn't there. This was very strange because the main road is one long road, and it didn't take us that long to get back to the main one. Also, there were no turns that bus could take to get off the main road, but we spent the rest of the night talking about the phantom school bus. I have an uncle who drove a delivery truck in the morning in Taipei. This was about 40 years ago. Anyway, one day he was doing his usual pre-dawn delivery. When he got back into the driver's seat, There was a girl with long black hair and grey t-shirt sort of dress sitting in the passenger seat. She was just looking down at her lap and didn't respond at all when he told her she needed to get out of the truck. She just kept looking at her lap. He thought she was like a mentally ill person, as Taiwan is not particularly good with mental illness, and many of them would roam the streets. And he was on a tight schedule, so he said screw it, and carried on with his deliveries, with her right in the passenger seat. When he finished unloading his last stop and got into the truck, she was gone. Okay, he thought, she must have gone home or something. The same thing happens over the next 5 days. At one point, on another one of his deliveries, this girl would be in the passenger seat, completely silent, looking at her lap. And no matter how much he begged her and asked her to get out so he could finish his deliveries, she wouldn't respond. So he would drive with her until the last delivery, at which point she'd disappear, when he went to the truck again. It only stopped one day as he was unloading. She was supposedly in the passenger seat, and he realized that she couldn't have gotten out into the truck through the passenger side door, because where he stops to make the delivery, the truck is always butted up against racks in front of the warehouse. So he puts boxes on the rack, and someone inside takes it from the rack. He locks the driver's side door out of habit. So he immediately goes to the front of the truck, and she's gone. He never saw her again after that. So I had just bought all the parts for a brand new badass computer, and had headed over to my buddy's place to put it all together, because we both like that kind of thing, and it's always better to have an extra head to catch the shit you missed. It's a dark, stormy night and raining. No biggie, that's normal this time of year. It takes a bit longer than expected because it's been about 4 years and tech changes fast, and there are a few new things I hadn't counted on. I can't leave right away because the rain picks up. It's pretty impressively bad, so I hang out for a little bit until it slacks off, so I can safely transport the new mini nuke I just built to my car without getting it all wet. I do that, then head home. My buddy lives near a river, and I have to cross a short bridge to get to the part of town he lives in. The road I take runs between 2 hills, then heads up to the high school some 10 miles, as this is southern Idaho, so by hill I mean small mountain, at least 200 or 300 feet high. As I cross the bridge I think everything is cool. The river looks a little swollen, nothing serious, and there hadn't been a flash flood warning issued that night. As I crossed the intersection and started heading down the road, I realized suddenly that the road is disappearing fast. There is a veritable wall of water rushing over ahead of me, and I can see my headlights, that the ground are normally a good 4 or 5 feet below the water level, are gone, replaced by mud, dark water. I don't panic. Panicking is bad and it'll get you killed. And I execute a very tense, very perfect, very fast and very tight 3-point turn. I do this because I can no longer see the road anywhere, and there's just water everywhere. It's now rushing over the road in every direction I look. I know I'm taking a chance, but I've got to get the hell out of here, and going forward isn't an option. I zoom back towards the intersection and manage to make it out of the water, but it's literally chasing me up the road. I hang a right and head towards a road I know heads up a hill and back towards my home by another route. It's no more than 100 yards down the road, and I figure that going up away from the water is best. I am so wrong. As I reach the turn, there is a waterfall where the road is supposed to be. The downhill road has turned into what can only be described as a rapid, and it's thundering across the one I'm on, heading across it towards the river. I J-turn, thank you Army, and haul ass for the bridge, hoping that I can get across, because I'm certain now it's going to be flooded too. I skate across it, it's fine, but the road on the other side is starting to wash out too. I punch the gas and head down another road that runs away from the river and gently up, heading into farmland and away from home, but towards a highway I know is above flood level. I hit 3 more washouts on the way to the highway, but make it fine. There wasn't anything like that monster I ran into the valley between the 2 hills, but by that time, my butthole was puckered tighter than a snare drum. It took me 2 hours to get home, and it usually takes me barely 30 minutes. My first time driving in a road trip, I was 15 and had barely gotten my permit and only driven around 100 miles total, and was going to Olympia, which was a roughly 360-mile trip from home. I drove there just fine and was fairly confident. On the way home, however, I was on the ramp to go from one highway to another, and a large SUV swerved and then quickly flipped onto its side, wheels facing us, covering all of the lanes. I slammed on the brakes, another car did too, and we were about 15 feet from the wreckage. I immediately started panicking and was unsure what to do. Thankfully, the other vehicle dialed 911. The man driving the flipped SUV was able to get out quickly, but as it was lit on fire, another person started to climb out, but had a bit of trouble, but luckily she was able to make it out, but not before the entire thing was almost in flames. A lot of traffic had begun to build up behind me, which made it damn near impossible for my inexperienced self to back out of the danger zone. When the SUV started exploding, the people behind me got the message and started backing up pretty frantically, and I was able to get my car out of the way. After an hour of backing up through bumper-to-bumper traffic and talking to the fire department, the wreck was cleaned up. We found out no one was injured, and I was free to drive the remaining 330 miles home. I was driving eastwards from Paducah to Danville, a 4-hour trip, at about 1 a.m. There were many terrible things that night, but I will share two. I was trying to make up lost time going 90 on the interstate. My headlights lit up a big dog walking across the road in the middle of nowhere. I was 100 yards out, going too fast to change lanes, and I remember thinking, shit, I'm gonna kill a dog. Then my headlights lit up the dog's antlers, and I realized I was about to hit a fully grown buck at 90, crash and die. There was no fear, just resignation. Then it stepped out of the way, and my side mirror missed its tail by about 3 inches. Later that same night, I came to Springfield. It was 4, my phone had just died, and I had no map. But before my phone died, I verified directions. 3 rights here, be in Danville 20 minutes later. Turned right. I ended up in a half-lane wide road that took me through a winding horror route through night black woods. The road would switch back on itself, then plummet before coming to stone bridges barely wider than my car. After an hour, I emerged from the woods and entered Springfield from the west. Verified directions with the shitty paper map in my glove box and took the same road, turned right, and the road took me to Danville, not those hellish woods. My friends laugh when I call that place Silent Hill, but I am not joking. I drive a lot as a tour guide through Central Australia, and night drives are to be avoided as much as possible. The fatigue load and lack of other drivers on remote highways makes it very easy to fall asleep at the wheel. I've done it a few times though, and the creepiest wasn't unexplained lights in the desert, but hundreds, literally hundreds of wallabies, think like kangaroo light, lined up on either side of the road as I drove through early in the morning. I'd never seen them in such mass, and was expecting them to adopt the normal course of action of flinging themselves under the wheels at the last moment, but none of them did. Those that were on the road hopped off the road and the ones on either side of the road just stopped what they were doing and looked at me. They all stopped feeding and stood up on their hind legs as I went past, just staring. So many of them doing that made it feel like I was driving down a very long passageway and they were sentinels to something. The early moonrise and total lack of any other light just seemed to emphasize the sheer number and total wrongness of their behavior. It gave me the creeps, and I was thankful when after about 50 kilometers the landscape went back to having 1 or 2 marsupials bent on road suicide, and I could get back to cane toad popping. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hoped you enjoyed tonight's stories. I'll be back again tomorrow with plenty more. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell icon to be up to date every time I post. If there's a story that you wish to share, feel free to send it to my email or drop it in my Reddit. Also, if you enjoyed the video, why not drop a like and leave a comment? It means a lot to me to hear your feedback, and it's always greatly appreciated. I'd love it if this video could hit 1,000 likes. Could you please make it happen? Pretty please? Well anyway, for now guys, I am going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.